get into it. We can get into it. Body fluids on the floor, get into it like a hood. We can get into it. We can get into it. Body fluids on the floor, get into it like a hood. What's the motion? Swing a right finger with a left, going straight, take the heart out his chest. Nut buck in the club, homegirls lose the heel saying, fuck my new curls and fuck them bum bitches. They talk like they hands on Mike Tyson. It's killed to be killed when I'm fighting. My sisters not watching, they jumping like double dutch. They like transition cause violence is given. Soft bitches is tripping.
I am African though. It's real shit. A lot of people don't believe me because I got clothes on. You know, when you say you're African, they want that Discovery Channel African, right? Where's your belly and your flies? Shut up and laugh. You're not sending money. Shut the fuck up and laugh. And they always pose the kids up and shit. I hate, you know the commercial where they show the little white man and he's like, fucking send some money to these little motherfuckers. I don't like the way they pose the kids up. Are you trying to be sexy or trying to eat? What the fuck? And they always got a big ass booger. I'm like, eat the booger. I ain't sending you shit. Shut up with the awe. Shut up. I'm offended. Have you sent money? No. Shut the fuck up and laugh. Everybody want to be offended but won't do shit about it. Isn't that fun? That's not. Shut up. And my friends never believed I'm African. I remember I told my friends it was like a big shock to them. I said, dude, I'm Nigerian American. Word? We thought you were like regular black. What the fuck is regular? Crayola coming out with colors I don't know about or some shit? So you call my parents' house, my father picks up the phone, you think you're talking to the Lion King. Can I speak to Godfrey? Godfrey's not here. Mufasa? You are still alive. Who in the head is Mufasa?
It takes many people a lifetime to make this one journey. Any single son or daughter that comes from the legacy of Africans who left these shores, anytime one individual makes it back here, it has defied the odds.
To our family reunion. Make some noise for your American family that came home to see you. And Americans, make some noise for your African fathers and mothers. Tonight is a very special night. Everyone bear witness. Tonight we were all together. We were all peaceful. We were all happy. We were all respected.
Most often we see African history starting with the slave trade or colonialism. And that is not fair to the history of African people because that was the interruption of African history, not the beginning of African history. This dungeon, it descends. It descends into darkness. And that descent into darkness is more than just physical because it's here there was the beginning of the manufacturing of the Negro. Africans were captured here in their original identity, in their original state, and it was here they were brought down into darkness and were stripped naked. They were never allowed again to be known in their Ashanti identity, in their Akan identity, in their Ga identity. So they erased all of that and simply said, they're black people, Negro. Millions of Africans passed through these doors, but they walked through these doors, many of them still believing in Mother Africa, believing in their village, believing that someone would come looking for them. Some of them just wanted to take some soil in their hand. Some of them believed if they just spoke in the ethers, that one day they would return. And we like to think that they were not failed, that our return, many of us who come from that ancestry, our return represents that faith, that hope, and that reality, that that was not in vain.
Yo, yo, yo. Welcome to Dudes Brewing.
It's your boys.
Yes, sir. It's Benda.
And Kel.
You know the drill. We're in the place to be, guys. So, welcome to African American History Month.
I don't think you really want to go to South Africa.
Why not?
Because you're black.
You are. He is.
Of course I'm black. That's why I want to go to South Africa. To join up with my oppressed brothers. To take up the struggle against the tyranny of the racist, fascist, white minority regime.
Fascist white regime.
One man, one vote.
One man, one vote.
Free South Africa, you dumb son of a bitch.
You dumb son of a bitch.
Look, I've heard just about...
Just want to get that out there. I am not black.
Harrison looks from the outside to be your average teenager. He goes to school, plays video games, even listens to music in his room. But there's one difference.
I'm a 35-year-old white man.
Harrison, born Antoine Smalls, has transracial identity, identifying as Harrison Booth, a 35-year-old white man from Colorado.
And when did you know that you were a 35-year-old white man?
Well, I've always felt different. I go to the store, the movies, and just be thinking to myself, like, why am I not getting the respect I deserve? And then it just hit me. I'm white.
And where do you work?
I'm a systems engineer for Coca-Cola.
Oh, okay.
That boy don't work. He go to school and that's it. One day he said, call me Harrison. I said, who's that? He said, me.
Full stop.
I knew it.
Full stop.
I knew it.
I'm not transracial, but I am not black.
Oh, thank God. I thought that's what you were going to come out with.
I might be a Mexican trapped inside of an African body. You never know. Who knows? Yeah, I think these days you can kind of get away with anything or whatever. As long as it confuses the masses, they're cool on it.
Tell me how you racially identify.
I don't know.
I identify as Korean.
He won. I think my vagina out. Where's my phone? Oh, it's on.
Catch. Oh, throw it back. The water bottle. Throw the water bottle. You idiot.
But no, seriously, I'm not black though. I'm not. I am African American, and what I mean by that is to explain to the audience and Benda as well, is that I'm an African that was born in America. Therefore, makes me African American.
I'm black, y'all, and I'm black, y'all, and I'm blacker than black, and I'm black, y'all, and I'm black, y'all, and I'm black, y'all, and I'm blacker than black, and I'm black, y'all. I'm blickety black, black.
And my experience being in the world and being also in America is the experience of African in America. You know, so It doesn't mean I'm necessarily directly derived first generation from Nigeria, but it also means it's being specific to who I am. And so I just want to tell you, the reason why I started doing this, guys, is I grew to learn that when I was overseas and I used to use the term black, I would sort of get like a weird look and people wouldn't know how to respond to me. And then I started to assess that I think the weird looks were coming from a lack of me being specific to where I was nationality wise or something geographical that they could humanize.
My name is Carol Elaine Fowler, and I deserve to live.
Carol, what are you doing?
I'm humanizing myself. I saw it on Good Morning America. If you humanize yourself to them, they let you live.
And by me calling myself a Crayola color, it seemed to be a bit problematic. And so I wanted to get more of a sense of respect from other people and other cultures that I came in contact with. And so I noticed the difference between when I would say, I'm black, to going, I'm African American. I felt people could understand, oh, Africa, okay. And yeah, and I felt there was a different degree of elegance and dignity that I got out of that response by humanizing myself more than just a crayon or a color. So, yeah, so if you watch our show, me and Benda will be talking, and we'll talk about a subject with Caucasians or any of these subjects, and I'll go, he'll say white.
I'll say white.
And I'll go Caucasian.
Caucasians. They were just a bunch of friends, white friends that came together and they solved mysteries. Yeah. Simple as that.
Caucasian.
And that's fine. Caucasian. They were from the mountains of Caucasus, okay? They were white friends.
Yeah. Which that in itself is actually, it's a bit of a hypocrisy. And what I mean by that is the word Caucasian was invented in 1779 by a German anthropologist named Johann Friedrich Blumenbach.
You may think you know exactly what race you are, but how would you prove it if someone disagreed with you? The fact is, even though race drives a lot of social and political outcomes, race isn't real. One of the first people to attempt to categorize humans according to race was a German scientist around 1776. He came up with 5 different groups according to physical appearance and geographic origin of their ancestors. Americans of European descent eagerly bought into this type of thinking around the same time. Some historians have said the idea that there were different races helped them resolve the contradiction between a natural right to freedom and the fact of slavery. If whites were their own distinct category, then they could feel a lot better about denying freedom to people who they labeled black and decided were fundamentally different. But as political priorities change, definitions of race in America adjust right along with them. For example, if you were of Mexican birth or ancestry in the United States in 1929, you were considered white. Then the 1930 census changed that to non-white to limit immigration. Later, when the US needed to increase its labor force during World War II, these people were switched back to white. And what it took to be black once varied so wildly throughout the country, from 1/4 to 1/16 to the infamous 1 drop of African ancestry, that people could actually change races just by crossing state lines. Then suddenly in 2000, the government decided that Americans could be more than one race and added a multiracial category to the census. This has left many Americans scratching their heads when it comes to selecting who they are. As many as 6.2% of census respondents selected some other race in a 2010 survey. The idea that someone might look one way and identify another way, or that they might be really hard to place in a racial category, is not new. This is why there was a public debate about whether MSNBC's Karen Finney could say she was black, or how we can't even agree on the racial label assigned to the President of the United States. Of course, many people feel their racial identity is very clear and very permanent, but the fact that some people have changed theirs and that no one can really argue with them shows how shaky the very idea of race is. This is all because there isn't a race chromosome in our DNA that people can point to. It simply doesn't exist. When the medical community links race to health outcomes, it's really just using race as a substitute for other factors, such as where your ancestors came from, or the experiences of people who may have been put in the same racial group as you. Dorothy Roberts explains that sickle cell anemia is a prime example of this. The disease is linked to areas with high rates of malaria, which include some parts of Europe and Asia in addition to Africa. It's not actually about race at all. This, of course, does not mean that the concept of race isn't hugely important in our lives. The racial categories to which we're assigned can determine real-life experiences, they can drive political outcomes, and they can even make the difference between life and death. But understanding that racial categories are made up can give us an important perspective on where racism came from in the first place.
Stephen Jay Gould. I was a fan of Stephen Jay Gould and read his Mismeasure of Man, second edition, and I used this in a seminar, and there Gould demonstrated that Blumenbach had promoted racism and slavery by designing a hierarchical racial geometry. He comes up with the point that the Caucasian variety from the Mount Caucasus produces the most beautiful race of man.
Long name. I will explain it to you. I'll show it to you. But his idea, he had a theory on 5 races on Earth according to color. And he conveniently viewed the white race as the most beautiful race on Earth, which was convenient for him because he's German. And he deemed any other brown races as subhuman or less than, black also being the least desirable. Which, if you look at the definitions of both of those words, white means purity, white means God, black means death. There's a lot of negative connotations to the word black by definition.
And in 1779, some 4 years later, this same young man, based upon his continued cranial research, he divided the human species into 5 races based upon his examination of skulls. 5 human races. And he broke down those races as follows. Number 1, the Caucasian or white race. Number 2, the Mongolian or yellow race, including all East Asians and some Central Asians. Number 3, the Malayan or brown race, including Southeast Asian and Pacific Islander. Number 4, the Ethiopian or black race, including Sub-Saharan Africans. Number 5, the American or red race, including American Indians. And again, all of this was based upon this young man's craniological research, all right? His study of the human skull. And his name was Johann Friedrich Blumenbach, a German national, a man of European descent, a physician, physiologist, and anthropologist. In 1779, Blumenbach divided the human species into 5 races, all based upon his research and observations of about 60 human skulls. And I will remind you here, brothers and sisters, at this point, that Johann Friedrich Blumenbach was a respected scientist of his day. So this work brought forward by Johann Friedrich Blumenbach is another deep root of racism. And that is not to say, I want to be very clear about this, that is not to say that Brother Blumenbach himself was racist, or that his ideas were or are inherently racist. The point I want to make here is that the introduction of these ideas and philosophies into polite society during the time of the scientific revolution leading into the Age of Enlightenment in the early modern period of human history. These ideas, in the name of science, racist or not, allowed for those who were overtly racist, those ideas allowed racists to co-opt those scientific findings by Blumenbach and to use those ideas in the name of science to further an overtly racist political, social, and scientific agenda at that time, and to impose and inflict those racist ideas onto the larger society in which they lived. It is the co-opting of ideas in the name of science to perpetuate a racist political agenda. That's the larger point that I would like to make here.
But he had a theory of 5 races on Earth according to color. And so his theory was taken on by other, I would say, Freemasons that were around the world and other colonizers that were Freemason affiliated. And they took that whole idea, theory of 5 races on Earth, and decided to institutionalize that on in countries that they had colonized out of Africa during the 1700s. So 1779 is the year, to be specific, when that word came into lexicon of being an actual term to denigrate a human and call them a color instead of calling them wherever they may come from. So yeah, so there's a bit of history behind that. And so one thing that I noticed in conversations or whatever, I think even maybe sometimes when we're talking and I'll go like I'll go Caucasian, and you'll say something about someone, you'll say white. The reason why I also try to do that now, I try to share it with people, which might seem like I'm being annoying or whatever, but the reason why I find it important is because I noticed that during race relations talks, when people are talking about an ethnic group and painting them in one color, one stroke, the conversations get a little uncomfortable. It's sort of like the conversation we were having with our friend of Indian descent, and we were having outside of the
the place that we're at.
The place that we're at. We were at a venue. What was it? What was the name of the hot spot that you took us to?
Oh, we're Shy Guys.
Shouts to Shy Guys. It was, it's a cool spot, but nevertheless. Yeah, so we were at this venue and we come out, we say hi to her, and she talks and she goes into white men and white people and white, and it felt very, very awkward and uncomfortable. And so out of that feeling, I noticed that there was a pattern of discomfort when you use someone and blanket paint them, or blanket paint a group. The thing that I noticed is that it's dismissive. I found that it's very dismissive calling someone just that white girl or white guy. And I feel the same for myself when someone goes, oh yeah, he's a black guy. Yeah, we need a black guy in our show. It feels very blanketed, and it feels demoralizing. I don't feel humanized by it, and I realize other people around, when you're talking about them, when you go into these conversations, I tend to look around. When I was younger, when we would talk about an ethnic group and we would refer to white or we referred to black, and we would have to talk very low or have to check the environment, see who's around us, because it is offensive. And so I wanted to break out of that terminology, and I call it colonial terms. I want to get out of colonizing terminology and just start being more specific to people and who they are. When I see someone Asian, I don't go, oh, that yellow person over there. But for some reason, in Western culture, there's that strong juxtaposition between black and white.
Yellow Falcon, what do your senses tell you? Destructo is a killing machine. His armor is impervious to our blasters. You got any ideas, Red Falcon?
Sure do, Yellow Falcon. Blue Falcon, you remember our battle at Dango Bluff? I'll take the legs, you take the blasters.
It was Beaver Creek and I took the legs. Make sure you shore up that flank, Black Falcon.
Are you talking to me? Because I'm the Green Falcon.
No time for that, Black Falcon. Purple Falcon, arm missiles.
Roger that. Arming missiles now.
Battle formations, we're going in.
Hey.
Roger that.
Hold up.
Copy that. Roger.
My Falcon is green.
Hey, we can talk about our Falcon colors when we get back to base, Black Falcon. Right now, we got a mission to do. Fall into Falcon formation.
Well, now, here's the issue, is that you're gonna give me an order, I'm not gonna know you're talking to me. Because I'm not in the Black Falcon.
Come on, chill it out, Black Falcon.
Yeah, Black Falcon. Relax.
First of all, I don't like the way you guys are saying black. Second of all, there is no Black Falcon. I'm Green Falcon.
Black Falcon, homie, no one's trying to get up in your grill here.
Don't talk to me like that. No, don't say grill like that. I'm the Green Falcon, and
Oh, stop being so Black Falcon about it.
What the do you mean by that?
Black Falcon, brother, I understand what you're going through.
Do you? No, I don't think you do. How would you feel if I called you Red Falcon, huh?
Whoa!
And Purple Falcon, how would you feel if I called you Yellow Falcon, huh?
That's racist.
That was racist.
Yeah, that's racist.
Oh, that is racist.
That's racist? Oh, see? Okay, no, forget it. Black Falcon out. Green Falcon! Green Falcon! Damn it!
Hey,
Why'd that green falcon fall out of falcon formation? Black falcon, get on that and report back. Black falcon. Black falcon, come in.
Yeah.
Where it's African and European, and that is a very strong defining point. There's some people that immigrate to America, and that's sort of like the first thing they notice. They go, whoa, everything is very black and white, down to a degree where I'm sort of able to blend in and get away with certain things as a minority that may be of India, or that may be of Puerto Rico, or or Jewish, that I can just blend into being white, and there's not as much hatred towards me because I can kind of hide behind the fact that they didn't enslave, my people.
Historian Matthew Jacobson notes that in the US, white or Caucasian was not always considered a unified race composed of anyone of European descent. Whiteness was often considered exclusive to Anglo-Saxon descendants, while other European groups were broken into different ethnic categories such as Celt, Slavs, Iberics, and Hebrews, which were considered separate races from the 1840s to the early 20th century. But in the 1920s, when there was a stemming of immigration from Europe, these different races were subsumed into one category called whiteness to shore up a cultural majority against other racial groups and immigrants. And this persisted throughout the 20th century.
But, but Africans don't have that luxury of being able to disengage with that. And Europeans, unfortunately, this is the word that they institutionalized with that German anthropologist. And then also the Europeans that colonized, they put it out into their English teaching, English culture, and colonized lands, this color coding. So now it's used as a check mark, and I feel like it doesn't help our society if we're not being specific and we're just keyword paint. It's color. We're painting everybody. So I just noticed that it's something I'm like, if we gotta feel uncomfortable talking about this and we gotta check who's around us, maybe we shouldn't be saying it.
Yeah, I feel like it's just one of those things that's been around.
And it's habit. It's very hard to break habit.
Yeah. It's been around for so long. I don't think it's in TV shows, movies, songs. You go to school. I'm not even from America, and in Australia where I'm from, that's how people would say to someone, the group of white people over there, or those black guys over there, and black people or black guys It could be Aborigines, it could be Africans. But like Kelvin said, the demographic of people who that hits is usually only Africans, because even in Australia, if you're going to talk about a Hispanic person, they never use that. They don't use that with any minority, no Asians, except only black people.
Yeah.
African Americans or Africans.
Yeah, exactly. So as you can see, it's very hard to...
Yeah, it's so hard.
And that's the thing about habit you pick up on. Obviously, humans we learn how to speak, from a baby, from a small age, through repetition. So us repeating certain terms we're used to is because of repetition. And like you said, you hear it in your movies, you hear it in music and songs. A lot of this comes from America. So America foundings of it was very race related. And the reason for the color coding, from what I've been able to assess and research, is that they color coded people to set up a class system, which is essentially, this was information that Europeans got when they went to India and they opted not to enslave Indians. They saw the caste system in India, and they also decided it worked in their favor to try to create a hierarchy of people to justify exploiting them or trafficking them or enslaving them.
Before we started thinking of race along the lines of biology, genetics, or phenotype, aka physical appearance, did you know that it was largely considered a category of kinship or group affiliation? In the 16th century, we started to see the use of the word race in English, but it isn't attributed to physical traits or behavior. It meant quite literally that you were all members of the same household, group, or shared a common ancestor. But when did race shift to being less about kinship groups to sounding more complicated than the lyrics to I'm My Own Grandpa? Well, we can see that starting in the colonial era. And that brings us to our second question. why did we see the shift in the idea of race in the 17th and 18th century? The answer to this question is firmly rooted in two things: the rise of global capitalism that was backed by slavery and colonialism, and a period of theorizations in Europe known as the Enlightenment. When the Spanish began the colonization of the Caribbean and later Latin America after 1492, they looked to native populations to mine silver and gold under brutal working conditions. They set about enslaving, attacking, and murdering those who didn't comply. Thousands of native people died as a result of overwork, genocide, or because they were exposed to new diseases brought over with the Spanish settlers. And when England established its first successful long-term colonies in North America in Virginia in 1607, they looked to mirror this pattern of enslavement with native people, while also seeking copious amounts of silver and gold. But they had limited success with this route because, one, Virginia wasn't exactly rich in gold, and two, native populations were able to resist the efforts of early settlers through fighting back or escaping and blending into adjacent native groups. English settlers still wanted to make money off of this venture, so they began to look to alternative ways of making Virginia profitable, and that came in the form of tobacco. But a major problem with growing tobacco is that it requires a ton of labor, and the laborers needed the agricultural skills to turn the crop into cash. Because they had already met with sustained resistance from native populations, English settlers looked to other potential labor sources: enslaved Africans and indentured British laborers. There are some important distinctions to make between these two groups. First, indenture was a contractual agreement with fixed terms that varied widely. Some indentured servants were brought to the colonies against their will, either as a punishment or because they were children. Terms of these contracts were often very exploitative, but many came willingly in exchange for their passage to the new colonies, and many of these indentured servants finished the terms of their contracts and began lives as property owners. Enslavement of Africans was an entirely different category of labor from indenture, because one, slavery was for life, not for a fixed term or a number of years. Two, slaves were not considered human. Three, it was not a contract because it takes two consenting humans to enter into a contract. And four, slave laws were enacted codifying hereditary slavery, meaning that if you were enslaved and had children, then those children would also remain in slavery. With the expansion of this system, there was understandably some resistance, even from Europeans. So in order to continue to justify slavery, we start to see the pseudoscience of race emerge that connected physical features, behavior, and legal rights right around the 18th century when colonial use of slaves was expanding. Anthropologist Audrey Smedley notes that scientific ideas about physical appearance and racial difference in the 18th century were largely folk ideas used to justify already existent social norms. So as a result of a desire to perpetuate systems of exploitation, more and more distinctions were made about the supposed differences amongst races, primarily the differences of black people from their white counterparts. This evolution of race became more concretized after social structures of slavery were in place and not before, and was solidified by the Enlightenment.
So the idea behind color coding people is to give you moral justification of saying these people are subhuman. Therefore, we have a right to traffic them and take them out from their country because they don't know how to be civilized. Let's teach them about the one true God, and let's give them a Bible. And let's give them an English name or a biblical name. So they would try to, I guess, term people as being savages, even though all cultures have warred between each other. I mean, European countries have fought between each other constantly, hence World War II. So, no one's excluded from being considered a savage, and no one is inherently savage. Humans by nature were tribalistic to a certain degree. And for some people, they view tribe as like, that's cool, it's nurturing your culture. It's cool to nurture your culture or whatever, but you still got to maintain your humanity to not ostracize your ability to connect to other people. So, but preserving, your thumbprint is, as from what you can learn from other people, is cool as a culture. And also the word culture, I would say, could be abused in some sort of ways, because culture is essentially what you learn at home. So whatever you learn at home between you, your mom, your dad, that can be considered Rwandan culture, You can go, well, in my culture, we do this, this. And I can go, as an African American, we do this, this. But I'm only speaking about my experience based on my home.
Well, that's what I was about. I was going to bring that up.
Culture you can make, within your own family. If you have an interracial family, case in point, you come up with your own traditions, your own mantras, the things that you want to carry on.
Yeah, I was just about to say, with your conversation about the word black or white, simply put, for me, is African Americans, obviously, they don't know the history of where they came from. So they use a lot of, well, I'm black and we're black or we're this. But for friends of mine who are from the UK, New Zealand, and for me, from Australia, we can be considered like African, British or African Australian, but we actually also do know a root of where we came from to a certain degree, if you're not like first, third or fourth, fifth generation. But most of us can be like, for me, I'm Rwandan. I can be like, like Rwandan culture, that's where I originate from. That's why I don't have to say, if someone does ask me, I might use it in conversation, as you've heard me say. But for myself, usually if someone's like, oh, well, like, what are you? I don't go, I'm black. I usually, I'm like, well, I'm Australian, but I'm also originally, I'm Rwandan. Like, that's who I am.
Yeah.
So I understand why a lot of African Americans are like, well, I'm black, because to trace their history, some of them have none, or some just don't. They have no idea where to even start.
Yeah. Well, the history of African Americans in itself is complicated. It's extremely complicated, and it's complicated because there were so many atrocities that took place with trafficking Africans, where, obviously they interbreeded family members. They had some of the family members sleep with each other. They would rape the family members. They would sell the babies off to another slave plantation, split the mom, put her on the other side of the states or the northern side of the country, put the father in the south, deep in the south. And so that's so much trauma. And then you come out of witnessing all of that, like a U.S. Military war veteran that has PTSD, or it doesn't have to be a war veteran. It can be just somebody living in a country that has been being bombarded by, war. You have PTSD, you get out of that, and then you have no therapy of how to adjust and adapt yourself into society, how to actually mitigate that. And that's on top of people not actually wanting your people to assimilate and get involved in society. So you end up with a massive identity crisis of trying to figure out what's normal and what's not. So there was actually African families that, some of the fathers weren't the best, some of the African American families, some of the moms weren't the best, some of the fathers weren't the best, because we just witnessed so much trauma that now we're trying to cope. And then we're also financially, we're way behind.
Oh, hell yeah. It's a big gap.
The other ethnic groups of trying to catch up and have some sort of resources of something that we can say we established for our family, like generations to pass down.
The wealth gap is huge.
Yeah. And and then you go even further into sinister redlining. You go into Planned Parenthood. You go into multiple social programs that were made to either exclude Africans or enslave Africans, like with the welfare system in America, and split men and women, polarize their differences so that they're at odds with each other, but give all the social favor towards the woman, which leaves the man out in the street. He turns to drugs and crime to try to cope or try to keep up. And then children end up being left to being programmed by the government. The government becomes their dad.
When Margaret Sanger, check my history, started Planned Parenthood, the objective was to put these centers in primarily black communities so they could help kill black babies before they came into the world. You don't see that talked that much about. It's Planned Parenthood. No, it's planned genocide. And you can quote me on that.
As founder of the American Birth Control League, which later became Planned Parenthood, Margaret Sanger was no doubt a controversial figure with disturbing views on eugenics, race, and population control. While some argue she even wanted to exterminate the black race, others are trying to erase that part of her past.
The Mike Wallace interview. In the eyes of some, Margaret Sanger has been a heroine.
In the eyes of others, she's been a destructive force.
In her own words, Sanger pushed for a society that limited births to those she deemed fit to have children.
Well, I think the greatest sin in the world is bringing children into the world that have disease from their parents, that have no chance in the world to be a human being, practically. Delinquents, prisoners, all sorts of things just marked when they're born.
In 1916, Sanger opened the country's first birth control clinic. As a member of the American Eugenics Society, she advocated improving the genetic composition of humans through controlled reproduction of different races and classes. She often wrote about the issue in the journal she founded, called the Birth Control Review. In 1919, writing,
I personally believe in the sterilization of the feeble-minded, the insane, and the syphilitic. The most urgent problem today is how to limit and discourage the over-fertility of the mentally and physically defective.
Many point to a 1923 New York Times interview as proof of Sanger's racist motives, in which she referred to people as weeds, saying,
It means the release and cultivation of the better racial elements in our society and the gradual suppression, elimination, and eventual extirpation of defective stocks, those human weeds which threaten the blooming of the finest flowers of American civilization.
Hayden Ludwig, an investigative researcher, has extensively studied Sanger's life and writings.
She talked about the need for race betterment through controlling these weeds, basically undesirable people.
In 1939, after opening another clinic in Harlem, the birth control activist launched the Negro Project, an initiative supported by Black leaders, such as civil rights activist W.E.B. Du Bois. Critics claim the program used the pretense of better health and family planning for poor Blacks in the South as an attempt to limit the Black race. Ludwig says some on the left grapple with Sanger's past and how to interpret her legacy.
They know when she writes about human weeds, they know that it's repulsive. They know it's disgusting. The left will never abandon Margaret Sanger because if they do, she's the foundation of so many of their views.
Sanger once shared her vision for a preferred race at a women's branch of the Ku Klux Klan, writing in her autobiography,
Always, to me, any aroused group was a good group.
Despite those views, liberals praise Sanger's work while ignoring her history.
I admire Margaret Sanger enormously. Her courage, her tenacity, her vision. I am really in awe of her.
Ryan Baumberger, founder of the Radiance Foundation, says abortion proponents are working to clean up Sanger's past and what she stood for.
They have to reinvent her every time they talk about her in order to justify their celebration of her.
Former Planned Parenthood Director Abby Johnson says those inside the abortion industry are trained to overlook Sanger's racist views.
They give you an answer like, well, I mean, yes, Margaret Sanger was a racist, but everybody was a racist back then. You accept it because she is your hero. And she has to be your hero. You cannot question Planned Parenthood.
In 1997, Stephen Mosher of the Population Research Institute wrote about the push to repackage Margaret Sanger in the Wall Street Journal.
The reason I call it the repackaging of Margaret Sanger is because after the Nazi regime destroyed the legitimacy of eugenics forever, they then went back and said, oh, she was just an early feminist. She was just an early supporter of family planning. No, she wasn't. No, she was a supporter of giving IQ tests to people. She was in favor of using those IQ tests to determine who should be sterilized and who should have children.
In a response titled The Demonization of Margaret Sanger, Alexander Sanger, her grandson and president of Planned Parenthood at the time, called Mosher's editorial unfair. In the same piece, Esther Katz, director of NYU's Margaret Sanger Papers Project, claimed evidence revealing Sanger did not rationalize her support for birth control on racist grounds, that she never advocated genocidal policies, aimed at racial, ethnic, or religious groups, and that she, in fact, believed access to birth control would benefit, not eliminate minority populations. Dr. Katz turned down our request for an interview, although in this article, the editor as public authority, interpreting Margaret Sanger, she wrote, by our current highly sensitized standards, some of her attitudes and statements can be construed as racist, elitist, ethnocentric, and not politically correct. In 1942, Margaret Sanger's American Birth Control League became Planned Parenthood, which has moved to fulfill its founders' goals, helped greatly by the Supreme Court decision in Roe v. Wade.
Under the veil of secrecy and deception, 60+ million babies have not been born because they were aborted legally since '73. 1/3 of that population belong to the African American community.
A frightening and telling number given blacks make up only 13% of the U.S. population. Dan Gaynor of the Media Research Center says that Sanger's true mission remains alive and well throughout today's abortion industry.
Look at the maps. See where the abortion facilities are. They are near places where people are marginalized, people are poor, people are minority, and that's their target market.
Generation after generation, we have built a better world for our daughters.
Because of allies in the media and academia, Gaynor also points out how speech from conservatives and others about Sanger's past, Planned Parenthood practices, and abortion is often classified as hate speech.
There is nothing as close to a sacrament in the media as abortion. It is a holy writ that abortion is protected. And anybody who comes out against it, any organization, any business, anybody, the media swarm.
So does social media.
Facebook's new oversight board, and this is really concerning, has 4 co-chairs. And they're going to be the appeals board for content. Well, one of the 4 oversight board is on the board of an pro-abortion group. There's no pro-lifers. They're not there.
The problem also exists on many college campuses.
I remember at Harvard, they laughed when I was talking about the history of eugenics. And they said, that doesn't matter. Planned Parenthood is not like it was during Margaret Sanger's days.
Those who oppose her views say not true and are committed to exposing her past for future generations.
Think about today, if you're saying something that's true, but the government calls it a conspiracy theory, you can lose, if you're someone like me, you can lose your income. You can be taken off of Patreon, you can be taken off of Twitter, Facebook, YouTube.
Where did you get taken off? Any of those
I got taken off of Patreon, yeah.
Patreon took you off.
Yeah.
What was their reason?
I wrote an article about the affiliations of the creator of the AstraZeneca COVID vaccine and that he was affiliated and speaking to the Galton Institute, which was until 1989 the British Eugenics Society, and some of the affiliations of that particular organization. So anyway, they didn't like that.
Yeah.
So
it's a lot.
It's a lot. It's very insidious. But out of the juxtaposition that I'm trying to highlight with the word African American is that I realize in order for Africans to actually have, from what I feel, I'll ask you, what do you feel would help African Americans in that country? I have my own theory, but let me ask you, like, to help them get out of a constant state of
my one is
feeling victimized to a point where people can feel dismissive of it at this point because they're like, you guys seem to have some abilities to make something of yourselves, even though people don't understand the history. And trying to diagnose a problem without understanding the history is like a doctor trying to tell you what's wrong with you and he doesn't have a record of your medical history. That's how dangerous it is sometimes when people try to misadvise or disadvise people without learning the history of where the people came from.
Where the problem started.
So it's easy to be dismissive and go, oh, these Africans are complaining again, blah, 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 all their victims, blah, blah. Stop talking about slavery. But yet, and you wouldn't say that to a Jewish person when it comes to the Holocaust.
Oh, God, no.
You wouldn't say that to other ethnic groups with their travesties. You don't tell them to just forget about it.
Yeah.
So it's not something that's reasonable. But
I think also, it's lasted a long time as well.
Yeah, and that
it wasn't like I'm not shitting on the Holocaust.
I know, and I've said this as well.
And I'm not.
That was a 4 year.
That was like a 4 year thing. That wasn't a
400 years.
Thing. If that happened for 400 years. Hell, you best believe some of them be messed up as hell.
And that's not even just to Africans that ended up trafficked to America. Slave trade started with Portugal. So this is with Africans that ended up being taken out of Angola. The Roman Catholic Church gave Portugal the authority to go into Africa for human cargo. Why that came about, my bad, we kind of segued off the question I asked you. But how that came about was during the quote-unquote Crusades, this is the Roman Catholic Church going into the Middle East to try to cleanse them of the spread of Islam and them killing Muslims in the name of God for 300 years, and they never apologized for it. At the end of the Crusades, the Roman Catholic Church had lost Constantinople to the Turkmenistan Empire.
Religion. The most potent force in the story of mankind. It has built civilizations and destroyed them. As the Easter Islanders pay homage to their ancestral gods, on the other side of the planet, holy warriors destroy those of a different faith. In the Middle East, Jerusalem, a city under siege. Inside its walls, pandemonium. Outside, 12,000 men, intent on butchery. Crusaders. Spearheading the attack, Tancred de Hauteville, a Norman knight descended from Vikings, filled with bloodlust.
So many people have died in the name of religion. Wars fought over religious belief have spilled so much blood, but I think of all the wars fought over religion, the Crusades belong in their own category.
The slaughter here resonates to this day. Tancred de Hauteville, a Christian knight on a mission from God. In the Holy Land, waging war on Islam. By the end of the 11th century, 600 years after the fall of Rome, the two religions are great rivals. Christianity dominates in the west and north, Islam in the east and south. Determined to curb the advance of Islam, the Pope calls on Christians to take up arms. Their target, the holy city of Jerusalem.
On the eve of the Crusades, Jerusalem under Muslim rule was actually a hotbed of creativity and interreligious dialogue. There were Jews, there were Christians, there were Muslims. For the most part, they lived in relative harmony.
But each lays claim to the city. Jews revere it as their ancient capital. Muslims know it as Al-Quds, the holy. From here, the Prophet Muhammad journeyed to heaven. And for Christians, Christ was crucified here.
It's amazing when you go to Jerusalem, if you just stop for a second, you'll see that these people actually have more in common than they have that are differences. They are the sons and daughters of Abraham.
To all who join the crusade, Pope Urban offers eternal salvation, declaring,
"The Lord beseeches you to destroy that vile race from the lands of our friends. All who die by the way shall have immediate remission of sins."
A knight could sin as much as he liked, and simply by going to the Holy Land, he had been given forgiveness by the Pope. He had been given his passport to heaven. He could win fame, he could win glory, and he could come back with booty. It is one of the most shameful undertakings ever embarked upon by our species.
with absolution assured, nothing holds back the Crusaders. One records joyfully.
Piles of heads, hands, and feet were to be seen in the streets of the city. It was a just and splendid judgment of God that this place should be filled with the blood of the unbelievers.
If I have a belief system that literally says, God tells me I must slaughter anyone who wants to stop me from being here, it would allow you to justify any horrific act you take at that point.
Tancred hesitates. He decides to ransom the Muslims and stop killing them. He gives them his standard, a signal to others that they're under his protection. At the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, he prays.
Having a singular belief system where I've deferred responsibility to God can allow me to do brutal things on a battlefield.
Pater noster, qui es in celis, sanctificatur nomen tuum.
But I think when it gets quieter, when the images come back into the mind, that has effect on a human being.
Amen.
Returning, he finds his captives slaughtered behind his back by other crusaders.
The Crusades were as bad as it gets. Remember that these guys embraced the same God, many of the same beliefs, the same prophets, and yet the streets ran deep with their blood and that of their brothers. It shows the extraordinary power of ideas to take hold of people's minds and drive them to commit acts of great sacrifice and love on the one hand, but also acts of tremendous barbarity and hatred on the other. It's the double-edged sword of religious belief.
The Crusades will continue for 2 centuries and cost more than 1 million lives.
Constantinople today is now known as Turkey. So, and once Europe lost their route to get into India, because they used India by proxy as a way to get to the Silk Road, to get other trades, goods, it was all about commerce. Once they lost their route to get into India, which because of the loss of Constantinople, the Europeans had a massive sugarcane addiction in Europe. Sugarcane addiction was rampant all throughout Europe. And so this is off sugar that these crusaders had brought back from India. They took it back to mainly Italy. Italy had refineries for sugarcane. But once they lost their ability to go back into India to get sugarcane, Europe had a massive sugarcane addiction crisis, because sugarcane is no different from cocaine. It's part of the cane family. So the addiction, obviously, if you know anything about sugar, the addiction properties in it is huge. There's almost hardly any food that you can eat today that they haven't artificially sprinkled some sugar into a certain degree, or it might have natural sugar from fructose or something from a fruit. But Europe's sugarcane addiction was the driving factor for them to want to go into Africa and go into other lands to actually find out how they could obtain more sugar. So Portugal went into South America, killed off a bunch of natives in what would be called Brazil, or pushed natives far into the mountains. And they killed off so many natives that they found out they didn't have a workforce to run the actual sugar plantations in Portugal. So then Portugal went back to the Roman Catholic Church and said, hey, we killed these people and we taught them about the one true God, but now we don't have a workforce to be able to take them in and actually get them to be able to produce sugar. And so the Roman Catholic Church, due to their issue in Portugal at the time with Nigerian Moors, which that is my heritage. When I did my DNA, I found out I'm Nigerian, but of Moorish descent. The Moors helped civilize Europe, but with them civilizing Europe, they brought Islamic culture to Europe in different degrees. So the Moors were in Italy, they were in Spain, and they were also in Portugal. And the biggest mosque in Europe was in Spain. And so the Catholics had pushed the Moors out of Spain. They eventually got them to leave. And so the Roman Catholic Church said, well, you know what? For those Moors that came in and enslaved us, it's time for us, not enslaved us, but came into our country and start teaching their values or whatever. We're going to go there and we're going to get their people and we're going to make them work for us. So the Roman Catholic Church was the first country, was the actual authority that gave the first country in Europe the authority to go into Africa. So they went to Portugal, then Portugal went to Angola and started getting human cargo to run these slave plantations in Brazil.
Ndongo, Central Africa. Today, part of northern Angola. In a struggle for resources that shapes the world we live in today, one woman fights to keep hold of her kingdom. Queen Nzinga Umbandi. Skillful strategist, warrior queen.
Hey, Ndakuna.
Nzinga was a ferocious woman who was a ruler, but she was very complicated.
Queen Nzinga confronts a formidable enemy, the Portuguese. They want her territory and her people as slaves. Portuguese plantations in the New World need a workforce to produce a new crop changing mankind's taste: sugar. Humans are drawn to sweetness more than any other flavor. Today, we eat up to half our body weight in sugar every year. In the Americas and Caribbean, the Spanish and Portuguese lay out vast new plantations of sugarcane.
People have always wanted luxurious food that tastes good. And the hunt for luxuries has driven the exploration of the world and the spread of trade networks.
agriculture on a new industrial scale, driving the demand for labor and a new commodity: human beings. Like many African rulers, Queen Nzinga has been selling captives and prisoners of war to the Portuguese.
The African slave trade was a conspiracy, unfortunately, between avaricious Europeans and African elites. Nzinga was a slave trader herself, like many of the monarchs in Africa at that time. But she sold slaves, other Africans, captives in war, to defend herself against the encroachment of the Portuguese.
But as the sugar trade expands, so does the demand for more African slaves. Her former trading partners have turned against her. They now want her people as slaves. In a mountain stronghold, she prepares to defend her kingdom and her people. Against her, not just the Portuguese, but their new African allies.
She was up against warlords who were taking advantage of a market for people. They were human traffickers, and they were armed.
Hey, hey, hey!
With Queen Nzinga, her sisters, Princesses Mukambu and Kafunji,
Hey, hey!
Yes.
Hey, hey! Zakuk! Zakuk! Kindila! Kindila!
the Ndongo are outnumbered, surrounded. Princesses Mukambu and Kafunji enslaved. Over 3 centuries, European slave traders will transport 15 million Africans to the New World. The majority from Central Africa.
It's one of the most horrendous, painful moments in modern human history, both for Europeans and for Black Africans.
But Queen Nzinga herself escapes. For the next 20 years, until her death, she will fight on and negotiate and bargain to keep Ndongo free from Portuguese rule.
I'm fascinated that there was a woman who was as powerful in the history of Africa as Queen Nzinga.
Hey, hey, Nakuna!
Enormously complicated and enormously brilliant diplomatic figure in African history.
250 years later, slavery will be abolished.
And forever free.
But mankind's taste for sugar transforms the face and civilization of 2 continents. Today, almost a fifth of the population of the Americas can trace their roots back to Africa.
And so Angola is one of the only, one of a few countries, a handful of countries that speak Portuguese fluently. And the reason for that is because the slave trade actually started with Angola and Portugal going into there. So, yeah. So that's me giving a rundown of what even kicked off the slave trade in a nutshell. But yeah, back to the question I asked you.
Yes.
What would you think could help African Americans try to become more connected with Africa and find a way to to heal themselves, if you have any ideas, and then I'll tell you what I have.
My wacky idea would just be like, they need to leave America.
Yeah.
That's number one. If there's one thing I've learned as I was as I'd sit at home in Australia and Sydney, and I wonder what makes me so different to an African American, because obviously we're both Africans.
So wait, do you mean leave America in a sense of like
leave it,
travel, or just
both?
Both.
You need to travel, because obviously not everyone can live anywhere.
And I would say more so than travel, they should live.
Yeah, I know, I agree.
Live abroad.
I'm saying
because living abroad changes.
Yeah.
That's a whole nother thing, because you have to embrace a culture. And like me being here in New Zealand, I had to embrace a culture, learn about social dynamics that happen between Māori community here, indigenous community, Europeans, learn about the Indian community that immigrated here, Chinese community that immigrated here. It opens you up in a way that you become a better human. But traveling, you can kind of take for granted, because you're only in spots for 2-3 days, and you still come with your same culture, which can be first world and entitled to a certain degree.
That's what I was saying.
But back to
on a scale of things, I was saying if you can, like, because not everyone, because it'd be stupid of me to be like, yeah, everyone just go and live wherever the fuck you want. I'm like, if you can,
if they got to work in a holiday visa program, and I would say do it. I did it. I left the States in 2008.
100%. I'm saying
went to Australia.
If I had to say in a perfect world, yes, I would say everyone just leave.
Yeah.
Everyone just leave. If we're talking like a made up world, sure. You'll leave, go to a different country, because like I was trying to say before, like I lived in Australia, and I asked myself, what is the difference? There's no difference except for the fact you live in America. You live in a world that's just made up.
Yeah.
Everything that gets broadcast is, with all due respect, it's just silly shit. It's all stupid. Yeah. It's reality TV, extremely disgusting food that isn't good for you, and continuous racial divides between people. Or if it's not that, it's your government saying like, this person is bad, we should do this person. And the sooner you get away from that stuff, you don't have any bias. You don't have any. People always ask, is it racist? Do you go through lots of racism? And I'm like, I don't. I don't go, because first of all, there's no such country that has zero racism.
Yeah, no.
But I can tell you right now, I'm not getting pulled over by police left, right, and center in New Zealand or Australia.
Yeah, and getting beat
with bats.
Bats and billy clubs.
You think you tough? You look so tough now, little nigga. Hate you black bastards. You stink. I hate your black skin. I hate your black pants. I hate black pepper. I hate black keys on the piano. I hate my gums because they black. I'd hate Whoopi Goldberg's lips. I hate the back of Forrest Whitaker's neck. And most of all, I hate that black-ass Wesley Snipes. Move it!
Hey! Jack's just trying to escape!
What are you talking about? I'm just sitting here. He's trying to break free. Get him! Stop resisting! I'm not even back up now! He's got a gun! That's not a gun, that's a book. Okay, secure the book. Fucking secure. Yeah! You're in this building here? What is this shit? Wait. We gotta do something about this. All right, we're gonna teach you how to read now, brother.
If I were you, I'd leave as soon as possible.
Okay, whose hand is that? Whose hand is that?
The great thing is, I break a rule, I'm gonna be in trouble the same way that guy Brad is over there. Yeah. It's the one thing I say is, yes, leave the country, because when you're in your own echo chamber, it's so hard to think differently. They're all listening to each other. They're all patting each other on the back and being like, yeah, we do this, and African Americans do this. Well, you don't have to do that, but you're all telling each other to do the same thing, and you wonder why you're in this continuous cycle.
Yeah.
Because you're all telling each other that it's all we can do, and you're all being like, yeah, it's the white man in the White House doing this and doing this. And I'm like, here's a crazy thought. I guess I know there is a lot of issues in that country.
Yeah.
Leave that damn country.
Yeah.
The same way if I was in a car that kept breaking down, I'm probably not going to drive that car anymore.
when the plant doesn't grow, you know, in the environment that it's in, you don't get rid of the plant and throw it away. You change the pot. It's reached its capacity for growth, and you feel like you're not getting much growth outside of that. There's nothing wrong with the plant. There's nothing wrong with you. You just need to change the environment. And throughout all civilization, all cultures, all communities, when crops didn't grow, people packed up and they moved.
Yeah.
They get the F out.
They're not like,
leave.
oh, hey, Jeremy, it's not growing today. Bro, you're going to die and starve to death if you sit there
at some point you're gonna,
oh, yeah, complaining about it not growing. Here's a crazy, wacky idea. How about we pack up and go over there? I see it's very green and it looks really nice and comfortable, and there are not a lot of dangerous animals around, so we might not die. Yeah. Wow, Gerald, that's a really good idea.
Exactly.
It sounds too simple, but that's the most simplistic way of me putting it is your environment is not great. Yeah. So you have got to leave that environment so your kids, your great grandkids can be like, it's not even for you.
Yeah.
The thing is, it's for your future kids.
Yeah, which is what I did. Case in point, part of me leaving the States had to do with me seeing the racial tension that was going on. That was an aspect that made me want to leave, because being born in as an African in America, you're treated like a natural born refugee.
Really?
Yeah, you're treated like a refugee. They're like, oh, these black people.
Yeah, crazy.
You know, it's like you're not even in the country you're born in. You're made to feel as though you're not even welcome there. Damn. So, but also, like you were saying about TV, film, cinema, and what it promotes with the type of content, images. Films are such a very powerful impact on things. And that's what we just talked about in our last video, which is about woke Hollywood and the social engineering that has been going on for a very long time. The actually very first blockbuster film in the US, the one that had the highest grossing salary, the very first film that was a huge hit, was a film called Birth of a Nation.
Birth of a Nation was just a profoundly important cultural event.
It's the first major blockbuster film, hailed for both its artistic achievement and for its political commentary.
And when it was released, it had this rapturous response. You know, there were lines, everywhere that it was being shown.
Birth of a Nation confirmed the story that many whites wanted to tell about the Civil War and its aftermath. To erase defeat and to take out of it sort of a martyrdom. Woodrow Wilson, the sitting president, had a private screening of Birth of a Nation in the White House. He calls it history written with lightning.
And every image you see of a black person is a demeaned, animal-like image. Cannibalistic, animalistic. The image of the African-American male.
There's a famous scene where a woman throws herself off a cliff rather than be raped by a black male criminal. In the film, you see black people being a threat to white women.
All the myths of black men as rapists was ultimately stemmed by the reality that the white political elite and the business establishment needed black bodies working.
What we overlook about Birth of a Nation was that it was also a tremendously accurate prediction of the way in which race would operate in the United States. Birth of a Nation was almost directly responsible for the rebirth of the Ku Klux Klan. It had received this romantic, glowing, heroic portrait. The Klan never had the ritual of burning the cross. That was something that D.W. Griffith came up with because he thought that it was a great cinematic image. So it was literally an instance of life imitating art.
The ripples emanate far out from just the simple fact that it's a movie in the early motion picture age.
With the tremendous burst of popularity that the Ku Klux Klan had as a result of Birth of a Nation, came another wave of terrorism.
We had lynchings in this country between Reconstruction and World War II. Thousands of African Americans murdered by mobs on the idea that they had done something criminal.
The power of cinema with Birth of a Nation, it inspired a lot of people to want to go and join these KKK factions. And the U.S. cinema has that power. They promote degeneracy. And we also speak about the power of cinema in the Balenciaga video. You'll learn the history of why government got involved in television with trying to put out social engineering and messages for their own purpose to control society.
Been missing now for 6 weeks. Faulkner is Caucasian. Well, they got that wrong because you're obviously white.
Time to do it all? Well, what you do is you just you cast a spell. You make a deal with Satan. Become a Satanist. Then it slows time down. The problem is that I have to give my soul to him. Okay, I was thinking about doing that. About 30 years.
So yeah, there's some things that African Americans say. It's the culture, but culture and traditions, all traditions don't mean that they were good.
Yeah.
Some things are bad. You can change things about traditions that need to be improved or altered.
Yeah.
So even though it might have been tradition to, I don't know, do something very horrible to children.
Kill the firstborn.
Kill the firstborn, or human sacrifice, some crap, from some Druidic British thing or whatever. Doesn't make that cool. It doesn't make that normal. It doesn't make it okay. So, because we're humans, we're all affected by each other. So yeah, so that's the power of cinema. And for Africans, that's a thing we don't have to term something as a culture or as a tradition. And honestly, to be 100% honest with African Americans, I feel like we are lost in translation. Like I said, we came out from slavery, trafficking, being human trafficked, without knowing where we came from, and that went on for 400 years. That now we're off an assembly line. So essentially, they've programmed us to be whatever they want, and that shows the power of the enslavement. I would even say like the African American church, and gospel music, and how deep that has an effect on African Americans. That everything is related to. I would say religious foundation that they can't seem to live without that need of needing to be involved in some sort of church. And I'm not saying religion or Christianity is bad, but anytime you're too involved in something, you're too ist in something, you lose your ability to connect with other humans, your humanity, and it can become like a religious gang mentality. Where you're involved in this, it's cult-like. Yeah.
Yeah, and I was just gonna say off what you said. It is you're segregating yourself to saying
that we're over here. This is my group. They're dirty. We're clean.
And in the more groups you keep popping up and segregating, the more confusing it is. It's already a detriment. It's already hard for African Americans, but yet now you want to put yourself in more of a group and say, well, we're African Americans. And we're Christians. We're African Americans, and with this, we're African Americans, and with that. But we don't like those African Americans, and we don't like those African Americans. Have you ever thought and looked around how many? I need to use this as the best example I can think of. Like Jewish people aren't like, I'm Jewish and I'm this Jewish. No, they're all together. Yeah. They're all together. Yeah. That's it. Yeah. He's Jewish. I'm Jewish. He's Jewish. We're Jewish. He's Jewish. Cool. That's it. They don't go, oh, well, he's that kind of Jewish. Well, he likes that. There ain't 15 different types of Jewish people.
It's fairly simple. There's everyone just says they're Jewish. It doesn't matter if they're Sephardic or they're Ashkenazi. They tend to not separate them. The only aspect of them that are separated within the Jewish community is that they do separate Orthodox Jews from traditional, just everyday Jews. And also there's, Jews that are practice Kabbalah for good reasons, and there's some that practice Kabbalah for very nefarious reasons. And nefarious reasons tend to be in the Freemasonry Hollywood cycle.
But like at the end of the day, they're all together. That's
they're all unified under the blanket that we are of Jewish.
Whereas I find
culture.
like what I noticed with African Americans is there's so much division even within yourselves that a government doesn't even need to divide you. You're already doing it yourself.
You're already divided. But that also started on slave.
Stems back, yeah.
It started on slave plantation.
Django here is a freeman. This nigga here? That nigga there. Let me at least introduce the two of you. Django, this is another cheeky black bugger like yourself, Stephen. Stephen, this here's Django. You two ought to hate each other.
He gonna stay in the big house?
Stephen, he's a slaver. It's different.
In the big house?
Well, you got a problem with that?
Oh, no, I ain't got no problem with it. If you ain't got no problem with burning the bed, the sheets, the pillowcases, everything else when this black-ass motherfucker's
Now, that is my problem. They are mine to burn. Now, your problem right now is making a good impression. And I want you to start solving that problem right now and get them goddamn rooms ready.
Yes, sir, Mr. Candy.
Go on now.
Can't believe you brought a nigga to stay in the big house. Your daddy rolling over in this goddamn grave right now.
Plantations inside slaves and outside slaves, and they got certain, I believe they got certain rights.
And privileges.
Privileges, sorry.
Just full stop for society, period. In order to manage a society, they manufacture division.
Yeah.
Because through division, people police each other.
Yeah.
That's whether around COVID vaccines, who's vaccinated, who's unvaccinated. And that's down to African Americans with the split in putting Africans in the house slaves, and making field slaves. The house slaves will watch the field slaves as privilege and go, that one out in the field's not doing what he's doing. On top of that, the rape and abuse that was going on there, they would put the mixed children inside the house, and they would leave the darker ones out in the field. And so that whole color divide became even stronger, established very early. And that's what I mean by a lot of African Americans are off assembly line, that they've been conditioned.
Yeah. Well, I keep reminding people 400 years is a very long time to condition someone, to the point where it's almost, and I hate to say, almost impossible to know. You can't get them out of this condition in 5 years. It's just not possible.
Yeah.
400 years is such a long time.
It would probably take 400 years
to get out of it.
For them to figure it out and go, oh, that's what we should have did all along.
Yeah.
Well, for me,
there are a few lucky people like you who've like woken up and gone, whoa, this is off. This is not right.
He used the word woke.
No, who woke up?
I'm just joking. It's okay. But you mean...
I mean, woke up. Like, you just woke up one day and realized...
he could have said enlightened. That's a Freemasonry word. But, became aware.
Yeah.
Became aware of that, like...
Well, you realize your surroundings. You've realized this is the world we live in. And again, it's my mother was very quick to be aware of all these things, and to almost teach me from a young age that, hey, this is a world made by Caucasians, white people, white man.
Yeah.
She used those words because that's the truth. This is a world that was made by them.
Yeah.
And if you can't realize that, you're in trouble.
One of my mentors, the late, great C. Tessalone Keto, who was born in South Africa, trained as a historian, wrote a book called Vision, Identity, and Time. He basically was the first person to bring to my attention the history of South Africa and the process of telling the indigenous Africans they were not indigenous as part of the educational system. So they simply said, you all weren't here when we arrived. This is the formal education these people were getting. Also called them Kaffers, which is a derogatory term, as well as blacks. And what did the people who settled there, who were from the Netherlands and from the UK and other parts of Europe, but mostly from the Netherlands, meaning the Boers, and then like I said, many Brits. What did they call themselves? In particular, the Boers? Afrikaners. What do they call the language? Afrikaans. Think about what I'm saying. Psychologically, they got themselves and many of the Africans, thank goodness not all, but many of the Africans, to identify with being black more than they identify with being African. And then they formally, meaning the Boers, they formally called themselves Afrikaners, meaning Africans. So think about that. So now you're the newcomer. You arrived in the Cape area a few hundred years ago. Yes, your ancestors have been here for a long time, if long means a few hundred years. But you have now mentally, and you might even say psychically, conveyed to yourselves, you are more indigenous and have greater rights to the land than the people who you found when you got here. And you've convinced many of the people you found when you got here that they don't deserve to call themselves Africans, that they see themselves first as blacks.
Yeah.
The minute you walk out and you think, oh, nah, I'm all good, is your demise. And I'm not saying I'm not saying it's evil, they're evil. I'm just saying this was a world built for them.
Yeah.
And it's not like 1,000 years ago. Redlining was only like 50 years ago.
Yeah.
Some of these things didn't happen hundreds of years ago. Some of these things happened in the 80s. They were happening in the 90s.
But it's very easy to forget because of the influence of pop culture
100%.
with film and TV, that the generation now, Gen Z, they can grow up and just be like, it seems so long ago, but
it's not a long time ago.
But it's not a long time ago. It's only they've tricked you in the television with the programming to think that
this stuff happened hundreds of years ago. That
because they're on TV, that everything's fixed, that everything's been remedied and everything's been cool.
Yeah.
But yeah, like, and that's what you were talking about with the Jewish community and the benefits that they have of understanding their unity. This is what Kanye was essentially talking about in our video with Kanye West, is that he said he was jealous of the Jewish community, mainly because of their ability to mobilize, not jealous in a way that he doesn't want them to be able to mobilize with each other, but saying he wishes his own people could pick up those traits that they have so they could come together and understand, hey, let's work in groups of 5 so that none of us are disadvantaged. It's like me and Benda as businessmen, we look at each other, we shake each other's hands and go, yo, let's get money. Let's get money together. Let's not screw each other over. We're brothers.
Fuck yeah.
We're brothers. Let's make this happen. It's the same thing Andrew and Tristan Tate
together.
They do together. It's that foundation.
Same with the guys from Fresh and Fit. Same with if anyone ever notices a lot of people who do well, whether it's I would say successfully in jobs, they usually form a bond. I'm saying not everyone, but a majority of them have a group, a partner, or something.
It takes a team.
Yeah,
it takes a team. And this is what I also talk to ladies about independence. I tell them, I'm sorry, your independence is not relevant. It's irrelevant. The fruit of life is with partnerships. That's where you get the fruit of life. It's with partnerships. It's in business and in relationship. Yeah. It's both. You don't get anywhere in business if you don't have partnerships.
Or if you don't like everyone.
Because you don't have a track record. People can't trust you. So if you're independent and on your own for years, it shows you have a bad tendency to choose yourself. You're unreliable and you will bail at the skip of a dime if something goes south.
100%.
The main thing is you being able to discipline yourself to understand my value is also in my partnerships and my ability to maintain those and what I bring to the table to want to nurture these things. So yeah, with anyone, you just got to have those values and shake hands and go, we're not going to screw each other over.
Well, yeah.
And that's what helped the African-American community is coming together and going, hey, let's look at their formula. Let's learn from other cultures and let's see what worked for their cultures, and how it keeps them going.
The Chinese do it.
Yeah, the Chinese do it. The unfortunate side of what I would say with the Chinese community, which is something that I've noticed or whatever, and it might seem like a very sensitive topic to point out, but I will say it. The only issue with the Chinese culture and what they are doing is that in their pursuit to try to overtake the European culture, they themselves have picked up Eurocentric tendencies of wanting to get ahead of each other and the materialistic aspects of European culture where they put themselves over
like family.
Yeah, over family and over other people. The one thing that I can say about Europeans that I've noticed, and I'm not saying that all are bad, but a lot of them are missing a spirituality component, which Africans tend to have. We have a very deep spirituality component. A lot of natives tend to have that.
Yeah.
And that's what made us not go and colonize and slaughter in crazy ways. There's always been tribes that have fought.
Yeah.
And that can obviously be exploited in people by another outside entity that want to take over a country, which happened with Africa.
Yeah, a lot.
But most native brown people have a spirituality component, whether that's Buddhism, Taoism, Christianity, Islam. They have that spiritual component, but Europe was never set up to be a Christian country. Rome adopted to Christianity because they were losing control of their population. So they just mixed in Mithraism, their idea of deities and gods, in with Christianity. And so you ended up in a Bible with 6-headed dragons and other sorts of things that they talk about that was a mix of their mythology being mixed in with Christianity in order to regain control over the population the Roman Catholic Church was losing. That's before Rome even went into a dark ages. But what I'm trying to say is that we have a spirituality component, and in China, depending on what part of China and what generation of China, it could be a lack of a spirituality component and them picking up on these Eurocentric values of being more materialistic than spiritualistic. Your mental health declines. And so people were actually pointing out the reason why there's been a lot of mass shootings in the States recently, and it's all been by a lot of different Asian people going in and shooting up schools. And there was just one I think 2 weeks ago.
Oh, no.
The mass shooting that just happened, and it was on Asian people, but it was committed by another Asian. And it's not to blanket paint all Asians or whatever, but just stating that even in the Korean community, if they don't get certain grades in a certain way, they're ready to do self-harm or hurt themselves. And so you need, to some degree, you don't necessarily need to be involved in a religion, but you need a spirituality component to understand we're all connected as humans to keep you leveled and grounded, where you're not trying to just perform to European standards. And if you don't get the right grade and degree, your European degree from your European school, a certificate, whether it's AUT, Yale, you're not ready to off yourself, So that's another deeper psychological component and dynamic to it. So
I agree with that.
I'll just say, and lastly, what I feel would help African Americans.
Yeah.
Because you gave your feedback on it. I think personally, they've been in a real struggle since the 1960s. The 60s were a very pivotal time in African American culture where we could have gone in one or two directions. And we obviously know this is what I would say is a Malcolm versus Martin Luther King situation. Martin lived for inclusion, but the only issue with living for inclusion and trying to be American is that you're at the mercy of your oppressor. And so I feel like every generation since Malcolm has been trying to fit in, and it's showing it's not working. And it's also showing the country has never apologized for their role in the transatlantic slave trade, which means they're ethically not actually trying to actively fix the country. They're not trying to, like Australia had a national apology to the Aborigines people.
Yeah.
Did it fix everything? No. But it was a consciousness to say, hey, we're admitting it. We did something wrong and we're sorry for it. Whether that was for the Olympics or not, which some people have joked about, they still did it. And it still put a consciousness in the psyche of the Australian person. Let me be mindful of how I deal with other people of Aborigines culture and maybe other cultures that I may come in contact with.
Yeah.
You know, but with America, they kick the crumbs underneath the carpet and then they complain it's molding and smelling. And it's like, you didn't clean it up. You didn't clean up your house, your floor. You put everything underneath the carpet and have the audacity to be like, oh God, it's smelling again. Why is it smelling, these Africans, blah, blah. It's like, you didn't clean up what you did to these people, you know? So you have to be able, in order to move forward and to make amends with it, you have to clean up your mess. And also, in order to know how to fix it, you have to know the history of how you even gotten there. I would suggest for African Americans to look outside of the actual slave trade in America. Look at the transatlantic slave trade as a whole.
Yeah.
Look at the Africans that are in Jamaica. Look at the Africans that are in France. Look at the Africans that are in Brazil and Salvador, or in Sao Paulo or Rio de Janeiro. Look at Africans of diaspora and how they've all been separated, and try to learn for yourself about the transatlantic slave trade and how we got there. I think the best position Africans can do, whether that's by African citizens, there's some people, some African Americans that aren't interested in fixing African American problems because they're making too much profit off of exploiting that. And you'll find that with record label CEOs. You'll see that with maybe a Puff Daddy or a Jay-Z or even a 50 Cent. These people will make TV shows and benefit off the chaos of urban crime and crime dramas, but they actively won't actually try to remedy their own problems. And see, the issue with that is because they were off an assembly line, made in America. They picked up Eurocentric values that they put money over integrity. They put money over their humanity. And so they actually don't genuinely care to actually fix the problem for their people as a whole. So if we can get African figures or African American figures involved that have a consciousness that want to put a case for it for, I would say, reparations, then I would suggest African Americans to do that. And
do you mean reparations in like money?
Yeah, reparations, I would say, in finances and compensation, and also for there to be a regulatory board on how African Americans can use that money, whether that's using that for stock investments, using that towards education, using it to financially try to enhance your people in some sort of way, that there's a limit that it can't be used for materialistic purposes, because it's very tempting, within American society.
I think that's the issue with like reparations. When I thought about it, I was like, you give them a whole bunch of money, they're just going to buy cars and stupid shit.
Yeah, potentially so, but it still gives them the opportunity of having options of however they want to invest their money. I mean, who knows? They might put money into buying cars, and it might be they're buying a fleet of cars to run a cleaning business, or a fleet of cars.
But then you can put that down and explain why you're doing it.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It should be
monitored. You can't just be like, I'm hoping this person's going to start a business.
And I'm not saying monitored because African Americans are uncivilized, but we have been conditioned. We are made in America to have American habits,
materialistic things.
And habits of materialistic things, and also with reparations. Multiple cultures all over the world have had reparations. The Jewish community got reparations immediately after World War II. They went and petitioned it to Germany, and Germany started paying the Jewish community for their involvement in World War II, which also helped reestablish their decision to invade Palestine and set up a Jewish community within Palestine, which that is a whole nother topic, because that's an apartheid-like condition which, you know, a lot of people have a problem with, especially people that might be African, because we've seen how that's worked out for South Africans in general.
Fascist white regime.
One man, one vote?
One man, one vote.
Free South Africa, you dumb son of a bitch!
You dumb son of a bitch.
Many of Israel's Ethiopian immigrants are poor and have little education. They arrived here as part of a program to fly all the remaining Jews out of Ethiopia. But some women say they were coerced into taking injections every 3 months for birth control.
At the meeting, they said, you don't need to give birth so many times. If you give birth a lot, you will suffer in life. You need a job in Israel. So we said, if that's true, we will never be able to get out of here. So we took the shot.
The Israeli government has confirmed the drug Depo-Provera was used on some Ethiopian women. The drug acts as a long-term birth control, but the method is usually a last resort for doctors because of problems treating its side effects.
We don't have any policy regarding using of these drugs. As I said, the Ministry of Health does not issue guidelines, neither in Ethiopia nor in Israel, what drug to use.
Activists are calling for an investigation into the use of the contraceptive when the women were in transit camps in Ethiopia and also in Israel. There are around 120,000 Ethiopian Jews in Israel. Many of them live in these underprivileged areas and struggle to integrate. But leaders of their community say that over the last 10 years, the number of births of Ethiopian Jews has dropped by half.
כדי שאתיופי לא יחווה אלימות מהמשטרה, הוא צריך לחיות במסגרות. מסגרות מסודרות של חינוך, עבודה, שיהיה לו סדר יום.
הם בני אדם, הם באו פה לחיות כמו כולם, וצריך לתת להם לחיות בשלום ובכבוד. כולם שווים בעיניי.
מה עוד צריך לעשות? קודם כל לצבוע את עצמו בלבן. ללכת, אם לא טוב לו שילך.
אני לא חושבת שזה משהו בגלל שהם אתיופים, אז יש כאן איזה משהו כללי.
הם שלא יהיו אלימים ולא יהיו עצבנים כאלו.
הוא צריך להמשיך לחיות כמו שהוא באמת, ולקוות לטוב.
להפגין, לעשות מה שלא, להיות בשקט.
מה שקרה בסיפור שם זה לא היה הבעיה של האתיופי, זה היה הבעיה של המשטרה. האתיופי כאילו שעושה מה שכולם עושים, מתנהג נורמלי, אבל הבעיה הייתה של המשטרה, זה היה לא הגיוני בעליל מה שהם עושים.
מה אתיופי צריך לעשות? לצאת מהארץ שלנו.
לשים מייקאפ לבן? לא יודע, אני לא יודע, אין לי מושג.
ילד אתיופי לא צריך לעשות שום דבר, צריך לשנות את התפיסה של המשטרה כלפי, את הגזענות של המשטרה כלפי אתיופים. כמו שצריך לשנות את הגזענות של המשטרה כלפי שמאלנים, כמו שצריך לשנות את הגזענות של המשטרה כלפי נשים, כמו שצריך לשנות את הגזענות של המשטרה כלפי כל דבר שזז שהוא לא מהמשטרה.
But nevertheless, there's been other cultures that have requested for reparations. And so I think the only way for African Americans to request for reparations is actually to decolonize the word black and start saying African. Because when you're talking about your human rights travesties, when people hear the word African, it makes them want to go, wait, if I keep hearing African Americans and they're complaining or there's a shooting and someone's been killed, let me Google history of Africans in America. It's very specific. And out of being specific, you get respected. In business, if you're vague, you don't get respect. People don't want to do business with someone that is vague in general. If you're vague about, oh, maybe I can show up. Maybe I can work with you on a podcast, for example. Maybe I'll show up at this time. Whenever there's vague, people will want to check out because it's too risky of an investment to do business with somebody who's being vague. So that's the importance of being specific and saying the word African. And by saying that and making that into popular culture within African Americans and saying the word African, it allows other cultures to humanize you and start Googling and doing their own research on, wait, what happened with Africans in America? There seems to be a pattern of the word African. We keep hearing, oh, there's another African killed on TV. Now, if they hear the word black, they're going to associate it with white. It's an immediate juxtaposition. and they'll go, oh, wait, what about this color? It'll be a lot of whataboutisms. And that was the issue with BLM, and also what people found out to have happened with BLM and how they purported their money, which is that same thing. It's that money over integrity. And that's the issue with a lot of African Americans, is just trying to overcome that conditioning we've had to become Americanized with Eurocentric values.
What you doing? Say it loud. Say it loud. Say it loud. Say it. I'm black and I'm proud.
If you're referring to complexion, in fact, there's a famous scene in the movie Cry Freedom about the life of Steve Biko. The presumption is that this event actually occurred. If it didn't, it still made sense in terms of the screenwriters and Richard Attenborough putting it into the film. And that is, Steve Biko was in court. He's charged with basically, being seen as a threat to the apartheid system, and he was banned. So he's in court talking to the European judge, the Boer British judge, and the judge says to him,
"Why call yourselves black? I mean, you people are more brown than black."
And Biko says,
"Why do you call yourselves white? You people are more pink than white."
And the judge goes,
"Precisely."
But there's no deeper unpacking of what just occurred. And it raises an important question about systems of oppression. Why did Europeans decide to designate themselves as white? More specifically, English-speaking Europeans, because the term white is an English term. When you know why they chose the term, then you know what they sought to gain by it. When you also see that they leveled the term black against us, Asiatics, Africans, Asians, then you know what they sought to gain by imposing that on us. But why the need to fixate on black? There's the work of a Harvard psychologist who I believe is of East Indian ancestry. Her name is Dr. Banerjee. And her work on looking at the implicit association test, which is used by psychologists to look at implied bias or biases that exist. She recognizes what are often called mind bug, or in fact, she coined the term mind bugs, which are culturally imposed perceptions of reality. And the dominant perception of reality for those of us who speak the English language is when you say black or use black, its dominant use is negative. Black magic, black night, black death, right? And to try to overcome that is very difficult. Now, this is a Harvard faculty member, psychologist, prominent psychologist who's pointing this out, and she calls them the mind bugs. Now, part of what people can do, you could say, well, you need to get people to stop thinking of black as something negative. Okay, that's all right, but in the context of do you want to fight that battle, or more importantly, should you be fighting that battle? Because you're still reducing yourself again to your pigment.
They made everything black, ugly, and evil. Look in your dictionary and see the synonyms of the word black. There's always something degrading and low and sinister. Look at the word white. It's always something pure, high, and clean. But I want to get the language right tonight. I want to get the language so right that everybody here will cry out, yes, I'm black, I'm proud of it, I'm black and beautiful.
Negroholism or Negroholic. Basically, to me, when I thought of that, that's in reference to those of us who still think that we are Negroes or black. We're obsessed with that. Even though if we really analyze it, we know it's destructive, just like alcoholism. An alcoholic essentially doesn't really know that she or he is destroying themselves by drinking an excess of alcohol. Or an alcoholic is one who knows that it's destroying them, but doesn't really care. Perhaps because they feel guilt or shame. It's a form of self-medication. Many counselors, psychologists will tell you. And so the Negroholic, to me, was someone who's still obsessing over some guilt or shame about being a Negro or black. And they engage in self-destructive activities. People say, well, you know, I know we're descendants of kings and queens, and I'll say the same thing. Name some. Martin Luther King. So I'm trying to be funny, and I'm saying, see, you naming kings and queens, you know, Queen Latifah. I mean, that's fine that we know these individuals who have obviously made contributions in their own right, but you know what I'm saying. You're telling me you're proud to be quote unquote black. I want to know what you're proud of. You're telling me you're comfortable with being black. I want to know what you're comfortable with. Tell me at length what your value is based upon your blackness. And if you start going to a discussion of legacies in African history, I'm going to return you back to the same point. So what you're saying is you're proud to be African. So say it. Why do you keep fixating on the color or the political construct?
You know, wherever the Moorish Empire went, and seeing that they have been there since, since the earlier times, right? The earlier periods before new generations are coming in, new migrations coming. I'm just talking about my country, you know. My sensible thinking is telling me, and not just that, and my intuition tells me there is a connection to the Moors, right? So to say I'm black, to say you're black, what does that mean? It literally, actually, if you think about it, now that I'm thinking about it, you know, it kind of excludes the rest of the other people that were also Moorish descent, right? And what does it mean to say black anyway? What is the definition of black? And then now we gotta contrast that. What is the definition of being a Moor means? What is a Moor? Because Moor does not designate color, right? Black is very restricting. And furthermore, who is truly black? Black is the, if you look at it, right? No one is just really black. Look, this black. This is black. I mean, sure, we can find some different hues of complexion, but no one is just truly, completely black, in my thinking. Not even the Ita in my country. No. You know, so I think we need to move away from those terms. I don't like yellow. You know, yellow is a word. Again, Eurocentric thinking, they've been calling Chinese yellows, you know. Filipinos, brown. It didn't mean anything to us. It doesn't mean anything at all to say, hey, yo, brown? You know,
we call ourselves really Pinoy Pinay, or simply put, Filipino or Filipina, right? So this is what I'm talking about. I think we need to move away from this conditioned thinking. This is part of the Eurocentric thinking.
White people were probably an invention for a particular political purpose.
Have you heard the saying, if it ain't white, it ain't right? Or, keep it white and tight. How did these sayings even come into existence? And how true are these phrases? To dig deeper into the Black epidemic, we have to examine the mind of the so-called Black people. We have to explore what they perceive to be the chief cause for all their issues, the so-called white man. Why are these people designated as white? For as long as most of you may remember, you've known these people as white. For most, this is the way it is. We are going to challenge this thought. It's time we set the record straight. It's time to tell the truth about white people in this chapter of Black Epidemic.
Something was bothering me about what I had read in my research, but I couldn't put my finger on it. And then I realized, wait a minute, white people weren't there. Like that label, it did not exist in these early laws of the 1600s.
Negro. They called Africans who they had enslaved, they called them negros, right? They were saying, and at one time they also said piezas, which means pieces, like things. But the idea is, again, to say, you don't have personhood. I've made you into a thing, and I literally mean thing.
I made you into a thing. What does Dr. Pimienta-Bey mean by making you into a thing? Is he referring to a metaphoric comparison to property, cattle, livestock? Or is this a play off the word black? Black being a word which implies something that doesn't even have life. Or is Dr. Pimienta-Bey also referring to something much more menacing? The answer is yes to all three. To expound on this, let's refer to history and a little-known quote from a prominent American figurehead. It is but justice to the fruitfulness of that period to mention two other important events, the Lutheran Reformation in 1517, and still earlier, the invention of Negroes, or of the present mode of using them in 1434. Inventions and Discoveries, April 6, 1858. By Abraham Lincoln, 16th President of the United States of America. Fear is arguably the most effective tactic of any oppressor. For so-called black people, It breeds a great distrust between your own kind. It breeds fear that your brother or sister may lie on you, steal from you, or do physical harm to you. Granted, these outcomes are very possible and very real. But consider this: the fear of an event that never occurs happens more often than not. And that fear plays a vital role in dividing our people. Fear does more than divide the so-called black people among themselves. Fear builds a wall between them and people of different nationalities. Fear and prejudice can make a person reluctant to communicate and assist each other. There's a mindset that makes anyone you encounter uneasy or at dis-ease because you consider yourself black. Majority of the civilized world knows the truth of who you are. Yet they won't teach or even discuss the truth about your history with you for two tragic reasons. Reasons we will discuss in this chapter of Black Epidemic. That is why the nationality of the Moors was taken away from them in 1774, and the word Negro, black, and colored was given to the Asiatics of America who were of Moorish descent because they honored not the principles of their mother and father and strayed after the gods of Europe, of whom they knew nothing. Why weren't these simple lessons taught to us as children at school? Why do many others know who we are and we don't? Why not teach us?
There are many people who do know, who don't care to teach it because they know that by teaching it, they are giving you an advantage. So some people don't want to convey that information because now your increase in knowledge, that's when they say knowledge is power. Knowledge is certainly power when it's employed. I don't want to give you any more power to gain greater access to the resources that are available. If you figure it out, I'll acknowledge you figured it out, which is honorable in a way. So, okay, yeah, you figured it out and I give you credit. So the motivations behind individual teachers or persons or whatever who know knowledge, that you got to take that on a person by person basis. But I would say that as a country, in terms of our institutions, most of it has not been dedicated to trying to spread knowledge to create a more egalitarian or equitable society.
Those with the knowledge of our true heritage don't share this knowledge for two main reasons: suppression or black dis-ease. Suppression. Some people don't want you to empower yourself with knowledge of self. They believe holding back this knowledge allows those in position of power to maintain that power. Or black dis-ease. They don't know if they can trust telling you such knowledge. When told the truth, you may be likely to react in an irrational, angry, or violent manner. Remember how you first felt when you heard. The term black is not about complexion, or black according to science means death. What was your emotional state when first listening to these chapters? Bothered? Unnerved? Angry? Furious? Imagine how your family would react to this knowledge. Your friends, a perfect stranger. Picture in your mind a European or so-called white person telling you, white means purity, purity means God, and God means ruler of the land. The result would be a heated argument or altercation at the least. This is why it is important for you to learn who you are, for yourself. Know thyself. It is an ancient mandate for every human being. Through sin and disobedience, every nation has suffered slavery due to the fact that they honored not the creed and principles of their forefathers.
This is our responsibility to educate ourselves. When the Jewish community knew that it was being oppressed or subjugated, they didn't wait for the Christians to teach them Hebrew. They didn't wait for Christians to teach them about the history of the Jewish people. They said, guess what? You're going to Hebrew school, son, daughter. The rabbi is going to teach you about your history. So you had synagogues or temples that were teaching the Jewish community about what it is to be Hebrew or Jewish. Makes perfect sense. Nobody should be mad at them. They're doing what they were supposed to do. The problem is we ain't doing what we're supposed to do. We have waited around for other folks to teach us about ourselves. That doesn't make any sense.
The black epidemic is now global. Even those in South America, Australia, and Africa have attached themselves to the term black. How do we reverse this? It starts with you, the individual. You have to see through the illusions that have been set before you by your oppressors. You must know for yourself the truth being presented here. If you're watching this, the seed of truth is resonating with you. The logic behind rejecting words that allude to everything harmful is making sense.
This is your last chance. After this, there is no turning back. You take the blue pill, the story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill, you stay in Wonderland, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes. Remember, all I'm offering is the truth, nothing more.
So yeah, that's what I think what heal African Americans. Coming together, do your research, decolonizing your words, because when you can say the word Africa, there's a continent, and if you can find out where you come from, then that's a nationality. Or both of them are a nationality. You can connect the two. You can humanize it. But as long as you keep saying the word black, you're nationless. And because you're nationless, you can't even put forward a case or even think to put forward a case for reparations or human rights to the UN and hold these other countries involved in the slave trade accountable for Africans of diaspora as a whole.
Yeah. That is true. That is true.
Love you guys.
Be safe.
Yes, yes,
Be
yes.
safe.
And Dudes Brewing, you know how we do. Tune in. We are live. Subscribe to Rumble. That's where we're uncensored. You know, and hopefully this video won't be censored. We didn't offend anyone. If we said something wrong, you got suggestions, please put it in the comments. And we're not saying that out of arrogance. Our conversations are pretty heartfelt. So feel free to critique us and see how maybe we can do better. Or if you got ideas that would help other Africans or other cultures that have been affected by dominance of other cultures. So colonization has happened all throughout history. Europeans aren't all evil. They also all aren't superior. They're just the last to do it. There was a Mongolian empire. There was a Persian empire. There was the Egyptians. There was a Roman empire. It's just they were the last to pick up Rome's archives of how they managed their conquests. The British and the Roman Catholic Church that got reestablished. So the British went and found Rome's old archives and they just applied it on a massive global scale.
Today, Singapore is richer than its ex-colonizer, Great Britain. So when I hear people telling me today, oh, Africa is poor because of colonization, I'm like, please, let's move on from that. Did it have maybe a tiny percentage in where we are today? Maybe, and I don't know. But I know it's not the cause. Many, countless countries have been colonized before. And by the way, colonizing one another is humanity's history. It just happened that maybe Africa has been one of the last, colonized region in the world. So in our psyche, it is there and it acts like nothing happened before to others. But flash news, it's the history of the world. We've been capturing each other back and forth, all of it. And at that point, my people said, look, you, the West, enslaved us, later colonized us. So surely, what is it that you're pushing for? We are not going to be for that. And at that precise moment in time, we made the fatal mistake to side with the Marxist socialists of our time. And this is how, as these African nations became free, all of these, presidents of these newly liberated countries were actually socialist presidents for most of them, the rest of them communist. People don't even remember this. You look around and you're like, how come you guys are still poor? Well, we're poor because 60-some years ago, we made the decision to embrace socialism, and we made sure that all the policies in place were actually a manifestation of socialism. And of course, we all know that if you practice socialism, at the end of the day, you're going to have nothing to show for when it comes to prosperity building.
When we understand what has been done to Africa, it makes it easier for us to strategize on how we can undo the damage, the destruction that has befallen our motherland.
China has done more for Africa than any other country.
I mean, it's true. That's not something anybody can argue with.
Yeah.
I mean, they came, they laid down infrastructure. They actually did something that the European countries been around for 400 years and did nothing. That's why if you see Africa now hasn't been developed. This was the responsibility of France, Great Britain, Italy, Germany. These guys have been in Africa forever, and it's never been developed. China just started putting interest in Africa. Now you have roads, roundabouts, like they're actually putting structure down.
So it's not that they're more intellectual than people. They just found a better way to exploit people. And that doesn't make you Great Britain. That doesn't. So anyhow, let's learn from that and let's heal our planet. Love you guys.
Adios.
We're out. Dudes brewing. You know the vibes.
Slipped into a reverie, I can see a better me. Things that's heavenly, like love and melody. Fly high, my wings propelling me to the heights of angels that dwell in me. These are the flights that I take with family. They keep me grounded by understanding me. I stand under the rain, it feels powerful. Same force that made all the flowers bloom. Same force we come from, me and you. Same force that made you so valuable. I say don't let the world take it out of you. I say don't let the world take it out of you. We living in times trying to hold on, saying what's going on like the old song. People feeling naked with their clothes on. They wanna go home, I tell them go strong.